What if a beloved TV collector wasn't just preserving history, but hiding it? What if, behind the rusty signs and vintage treasures, there was something darker, something never meant to be found? When Frank Fritz's garage was finally opened, no one expected what was waiting inside. Not the fans. Not the family. Not even those closest to him. What they discovered wasn't just shocking, it was almost unbelievable. Artifacts that defied logic. Items some claim should have been in a museum. Others say they never should have existed at all. And here's the twist, Frank wasn't around to explain any of it. Was it a secret collection? A forgotten obsession? Or something far more controversial? In today's video, we dive deep into what was really uncovered inside Frank Fritz's garage, and why it left everyone speechless. Frank Fritz built his entire life around the thrill of discovery. As the co-host of American Pickers, he didn't just scour barns and garages for rusty treasures, he captured the imagination of a nation. Premiering in 2010 on the History Channel, the show became an instant phenomenon, and Frank, with his sharp eye and genuine passion, quickly won over fans across the country. While Mike Wolfe gravitated toward motorcycles and old signage, Frank carved out his own niche, specializing in vintage toys, oil cans, gas station memorabilia, and classic cars. His encyclopedic knowledge of Americana and his relatable charm made him more than a co-host, he became the heart of the show. And when the cameras weren't rolling, Frank continued doing what he loved most, launching his own business, Frank Fritz Finds, right in the heart of Iowa. It wasn't just a store, it was a sanctuary for the forgotten past, curated by a man who never stopped believing in its value. Over the years, Frank Fritz became more than just a picker, he became a guardian of forgotten history, a man who found beauty where others saw junk. To millions of viewers, he wasn't just collecting antiques, he was preserving America's soul, one dusty garage at a time. But then, without warning, he vanished from the spotlight. The official reason? Health issues in 2020. But was that the whole story? Or was something deeper driving his sudden exit? For someone who dedicated his life to digging up the hidden past, Frank's own story suddenly became the mystery. Where did he go? What happened in those silent, missing years after the cameras stopped rolling? This was a man who once stood at the center of one of TV's most beloved shows. And yet, just like one of his buried treasures, Frank himself seemed to disappear, quietly, completely, and without explanation. Then, without notice, he was gone. It wasn't even a real goodbye. There were no interviews or statements. The only thing that fans could think of was that he was sick. After he had been dead for a while, they opened his garage. It stopped feeling like a coincidence all of a sudden. Frank Fritz's story didn't stop when he quit American Pickers in 2020. In fact, that's when the real mystery began. On paper, it was said that he quit because he needed back surgery. Insiders didn't think anything else was going on, though. They said that Frank wasn't just sick. He was slowly, carefully, and maybe for a reason pulling away from the world. Mike Wolfe, who used to be his co-host, kept growing the business. Frank, on the other hand, forgot all about being famous. Even fans who had been following him for years had no idea what or where he was. By the middle of 2022, everyone knew that Frank had a stroke that left him unable to work. He was found in his home half-drunk. But that wasn't the whole story. A lot of people went crazy when, after his stroke, the court quickly named a guardian to take care of his business. A court action that is usually only taken by people who are very sick and can't handle their own lives. His property, like his house and the now famous garage, was instantly put under strict guard. The question was why he is under so much judicial strain. Others pointed out that no family member had stepped in, while others said it was the normal thing to do. There was a mystery about what was in the garage. People who went to see Frank in his last years said that the garage door hadn't been opened in a long time, not even by close friends. What did he hide? Why is that? People who live in Iowa say that Frank quit socializing completely. He used to be very friendly to people who were interested in antiques. He now kept his land private and fenced in. One neighbor said they heard loud engine revving at strange times of the night. Someone else said they saw a delivery truck show up without plates and unload a covered car right into Frank's garage. There were also reports that Frank bought a car at a secret estate sale in Michigan, close to a place where GM used to store old prototypes. There were no public records or witnesses at the sale. Only a few people who were there said Frank left that day with something hidden under a tarp and a look on his face that said he found more than just a collectible. We will get back to this in a bit and figure everything out. Frank never spoke in public again after his stroke. He didn't say anything online or in a statement about why he wasn't on the show that made him popular. Everyone was left with doubts. For example, why was a court-appointed manager sent to protect his property so quickly? What did they want to hide or keep from being found? And maybe the biggest question of all, what did Frank mean when a note written by hand was found in the garage? It only said, "I left everything there." Was it a farewell note, an admission, or a warning? Everything will be shown in the video later. As soon as the garage door opened, the light hit those long-abandoned machines for the first time in years. It was clear that this wasn't just the collection of an avid antique hunter. This was a whole different thing. There were cars inside that no one knew about. One in particular would go on to cause a huge amount of debate. We'll talk about the car that didn't have a VIN, the tag that said, "experimental use only," and the car that not even experts could explain later. But first, you need to know one thing about Frank Fritz. He did it for more than just fun. He gathered for a reason. It could have been to protect something that the world was never meant to see or didn't deserve to see. You need to know that Frank Fritz wasn't just collecting to make his house look nicer. His goal was to find stories that no one had heard before. This is where the story gets more complicated. Because the facts about what Frank really owned don't answer any questions, even when the internet stories are taken away. Let's talk about some of the tools that Frank had hidden in his garage. Let's look at the 1956 Chevrolet Bear, which is already a famous car. Frank not only had one, but he also had it fixed up with great care. That car wasn't just a prize, it held a lot of history. The 1967 Ford Fairlane GT390 comes next. He paid about $7,000 for this beauty and more than $4,000 to fix it up. Frank had said it was a beast that should be heard again. Would you like to see another piece? He is said to have bought it with Mike Wolfe. It's a Cadillac Fleetwood. That car was high class on wheels. It was heavy, chromed, and made to move like a ghost. All of this was plain. Let's talk about the pieces that caused a stir that he owned. Frank owned two very uncommon 1954 Nash Healey racing cars. These cars had a British chassis, American power, and Italian styling. Altogether, he paid $46,000 for them. The best part is now here. One of those cars had never been shown or registered in his name, according to public records. How do you hide that car? Was that the only car he had hidden? At the end of the movie, this question will blow your mind. It was also known that Frank was one of only a few private owners in Iowa who owned a 1914 Mertz bike car. Old furniture with three wheels that looked like it belonged in a fantasy movie. More than $35,000 was paid for it. You already know that people don't just pick these cars, they hunt them. It's also possible that Frank was one of the best hunters and had the money, fame, and sense to find them before anyone else did. The list was so long that not even his closest friends knew it all. Frank never bragged, but I always got the feeling he had something stashed away that he didn't want the cameras to see, said a former friend. You may be thinking why you would hide part of your collection when you're known for sharing your passion with the world. After his stroke in 2022, that secret seemed even less likely to be true. The hospital stays, the court case over his care, and the custody all made the news. But in the court papers, there were references to personal property with unknown values being kept in more than one place. That led to a court-supervised inspection, which focused on his garage in particular. This was not just normal behavior. It was a warning sign. There would be no need for such a detailed forensic inventory if Frank's things were so well documented. But there was something about that garage that needed more care. Even the court put a temporary seal on his things to keep people from messing with them or stealing them. Why would the court go to all that trouble for some old cars and gas station signs? Some people who knew Frank say that in his later years, he changed the things he collected. He was no longer interested in trading finds for cash or sharing them with other people. He instead shut down and became more defensive. Several museums and car shows had asked to show parts of his collection, but he turned them down. Plus, no one had been in the garage in years, not even his co-host Mike Wolf. Mike said in interviews that he and Frank had lost touch and hadn't talked in a while before Frank's stroke. The same thing my friend said. Frank was no longer in touch with anyone. You guys must be dying to know more. And it makes sense, if Frank really liked collecting old things that much, why didn't we see his own collection? It's easy to say. Frank's garage was never shown on TV. Fans knew about his collection, which included old bikes, signs, and, of course, classic cars. But no one knew how far it went. That wasn't a mistake. Frank didn't show off his stuff on purpose like many people in his field did. While Mike Wolf, his former co-host, opened stores and built a public empire, Frank trashed the attention in a quiet way. Some people called it the show's aftermath. Others said it was because his health was getting worse. The real reason might be that he was afraid of something going public because it was so important to him. Either that or he wasn't allowed to talk about it. Something was hidden under a tarp behind a locked garage door in Iowa, ready to be found at the right time. The story didn't really start to come together until after he died. Frank didn't have any children or a spouse when he died, so his estate was handled by people chosen by the court. This meant that a full list of everything he left behind would be made. Officials thought they might find some valuable antiques or maybe a few rare cars when they got to the land, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found. The dust and time had shut up the garage that hadn't been used in years. It looked like no one had opened the door in over 10 years because it was so stiff. The antique car community had heart attacks when they finally opened the door and saw what was inside. It all began when they opened the garage door. They were looking forward to seeing cars like the famous 1956 Chevrolet Bear, the 1967 Ford Fairlane GT that he had fixed up, and even the Cadillac Fleetwood that he bought with Mike Wolf many years ago. People knew about these cars. Some had even been briefly seen on social media or talked about in old conversations. Several stories, though, say that there was one car that no one knew. Not Frank's family, friends, or even die-hard fans who had been following his collection for years. Because it was parked across the back wall and covered in a dirty gray tarp, it was clear that this car wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't the right shape. It wasn't tall enough and didn't look like any known production model. It was also too low to the ground. The story said that the room was dead silent when the expert pulled back the tarp. It looked like a Corvette, but not like any Corvette anyone had ever seen. The lines were way too sharp. Too many turns were there. The body felt like an idea car, not a real car that was ever meant to be driven on the road. The strangest thing was that there was no VIN or other identification number where it should have been. There was instead a small metal tag that said, "Experimental use only." The rumors began at that point. Was this a one-of-a-kind handmade job or a master copy? Or could it be something more, a prototype that got lost in the history of cars? Some said it looked like the famous Corvette Grand Sport, a race car that GM worked on in secret in the 1960s but couldn't use because of corporate racing rules. There were only 5 that were ever made. All 5 have been found and are either locked up in museums or owned by very wealthy owners. What did this mean? Thoughts started to fly around online. Some people thought that Frank got the car through a deal with a former GM engineer. Others said he might have bought the car in Michigan at an unknown estate sale and paid cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. But why hide it? Why not bring it up? Frank has spent decades showing his life and collection on national TV. So why would he bury this car in the back of his shed, away from everyone else? Then there was another puzzle. What was that note? There was a tape on the back wall just above his old workbench, according to reports and online stories. There were more specifics in the accounts. It was a piece of yellow paper with Frank's writing on it. Just, "I left everything there." Nothing else was said or explained. It was just that. Some people said it was just a story. Some said it was the end of the collection he loved so much. Someone else asked, was this rumor true? Or maybe it was a message, a clue that someone would find someday. It's strange to find something that doesn't exist, and it's even stranger that the person who found it chose not to tell anyone. Was Frank keeping a secret or was he telling the truth? Could this car really be a lost piece of automotive history, or was it all a big internet hoax? The garage had only been open for a short time, but rumors were already flying like wildfire. People quickly spread the news that Frank Fritz had found a car in his private collection that didn't match any known model, wasn't registered, and had a tag that said, "Experimental use only." There were no photos, but that only made people more curious. In this day and age of AI, people started making their own versions of the photos and posting them online, saying that they were the real ones. Even if the real picture is out there, it will be hard to tell the difference between reality and the truth. But don't worry, we'll make it clear in this video. What was it? Was it real? And why had Frank, who is known for telling fans about even the smallest finds on American pickers, never brought it up? After the initial shock wore off, the investigation began. Classic car appraisers and forensic automotive experts were called in to look at the find. Most people thought it was a high-end replica, a tribute car, or a clever mix of old GM designs. But when they started looking at the frame, the materials, and the welds, they saw something much more disturbing. It wasn't work done in a garage, it was factory-level work from a known factory. The report said the body looked a lot like a Corvette and the legendary 1963 Grand Sport, but the proportions were off. The rear fenders flared too far out, and the front scoop was too deep. Its experimental design, on the other hand, was very familiar to people who had studied the history of Chevrolet's racing division in the 1960s. This is where the controversy started. In the early 1960s, Zora Arkus Dunto, who is known as the "godfather" of the Corvette, started the Grand Sport program in secret. The goal was to make a lightweight, race-winning version of the Corvette that could compete with the Shelby Cobra. It is said that only 5 cars were built before the project was called off. For decades, people have said that a few more prototypes were made in secret, some for testing, some smuggled out by bad engineers, and at least one that disappeared during a cross-country shipment. GM has always denied this, of course. The company says there are only 5 Grand Sports, but people who work there have been saying different for years. One of Frank's friends said that he had once talked about going to an estate auction in Flint, Michigan, which is where General Motors started. The auction wasn't open to the public. Frank heard about it from an old motorcycle contact. He was said to have come back from that trip with something important that he didn't even want to show his closest friends. When asked about it, Frank allegedly said, "It's older than it looks." No one paid much attention to it at the time because Frank was known for keeping things to himself. Now that we know what was found, those vague comments made more sense. Another secret was shared with the public on the internet. An old Polaroid picture was found in a drawer in the garage's workbench. It showed Frank standing next to the mystery car when he was younger, holding what looked like a folded blueprint or technical diagram. The auto in the photograph turned into best partly restored, its bodywork unfinished. Evidently, once this all came to light, Corvette forums, automobile historians, and conspiracy theorists lit up. Some argued the car turned into an advanced replica built by using a private coach builder using vintage GM molds. Others insisted it had to be one of the long-rumored take-a-look-at mules, prototypes that GM denied ever existed. Some skeptics claimed that everything was a hoax, performed through Frank himself as one final thriller to stir the pot after his demise. However, there was one issue no one ought to explain. Why would he disguise it? And the way would it gain him after his demise? It became no longer like he had any friends or lovers he had left in the back of. One concept counseled that Frank might also have signed a non-disclosure settlement while he acquired the auto. Possibly the individual that offered it to him did not need it traced. Or maybe Frank feared the prison effects if it was traced back to GM. In spite of everything, if the car became by no means officially launched, he technically wasn't supposed to have it. So, now permits cut to the chase and uncover the fact. Frank Fritz did have an impressive collection of classic cars and antiques documented and valued via courts after his stroke. The Bear, the Fairlane GT, even the Cadillac Fleetwood, the ones were all real, showed, and demonstrated. The Nash Hillalees also real, uncommon, high-priced, and absolutely underneath the radar. But the mysterious Corvette without a VIN and the brass tag studying experimental use best. That is where reality starts off evolved to blur. There were no credible pictures, no reputable office work, and no museum or collector has tested the sort of car ever being in Frank's ownership. The Polaroid, the notice at the storage wall, the name of the game auction in Michigan, all of that is unverified. It's been concluded after loads of research that these stories gained momentum in online boards however continue to be unsupported by way of difficult evidence.